There is a sound most people never hear, the sound of a door being closed from the outside. Bolt by bolt, 17 of them tightened by hand, by people standing in the daylight, sealing 5 other people inside a chamber the size of a small van. From this moment, those 5 cannot open the door themselves. Someone else has to let them out. In a few hours, that will not matter. By then, the question of the door will already be over. The man who built this machine once said a thing out loud on camera with a smile. He said, "At some point, safety is just pure waste." This is the story of what that sentence costs and of who pays it. To understand why 5 people climbed into that chamber, you have to understand the thing that was pulling them down. Not the machine, the dream. 2.5 miles below the surface of the North Atlantic, in permanent cold and permanent dark, there is a wreck. It is the most famous object on the floor of any ocean on Earth. More than a century ago, the people who built it told the world it was practically unsinkable. That word, unsinkable, is where this story really begins. Not in 2023. In the oldest mistake human beings make, we are a species that falls in love with our own machines. We build something enormous, something beautiful, something that works. And somewhere in the building of it, we start to believe the rules bent for us. The sea did not agree. It never does. The sea is the one investor that always does its own due diligence. It is worth understanding the place itself, because the place is the other main character in this story, and it never says a word. The Titanic rests around 12,500 feet down, close to 2.5 miles of ocean stacked overhead. There is no light there. There has been no light there for the entire history of the human species. The temperature hovers just above freezing, and the pressure is almost impossible to feel in your imagination. Nearly 400 times what you carry on your skin right now. A weight on every part of the hull, like the weight of a stack of cars on every square inch. That is the environment a person proposes to visit in a vessel they built. It is not hostile the way a mountain is hostile, or a desert. It is hostile the way space is hostile. A place that was never meant to hold us, that kills not with malice but with simple, total indifference. Up here, a mistake gives you a second chance. Down there, the ocean does not deal in second chances. It deals in physics, and physics has never once been talked out of anything. And resting in that dark is the proof of how this ends, because the wreck itself is a monument to this exact mistake. In 1912, the Titanic was the largest moving object human beings had ever made. It was a marvel, and it was sold to the world as something close to invincible. The confidence was so complete that it carried less than half the lifeboats it would have needed, because the ship itself was supposed to be the lifeboat. On its very first voyage, that certainty met a wall of ice, and more than 1,500 people went into the freezing water and did not come out. So the lesson was already there, written a century in advance, in the very thing they were paying to go and see. The deep ocean had already taught humanity, once, in the most expensive way imaginable, what it does to people who decide their machine is the exception. The wreck was not just a destination, it was the warning, sitting on the seafloor in the dark, waiting to be read. They sailed toward it to look at it. They did not, in the end, read it. And so for 100 years, that wreck has sat in the dark, pulling people toward it. Scientists, explorers, the very rich. To stand, to float, a few feet from it is, for a certain kind of person, the closest thing on this planet to standing on the moon. One of those people had an idea. His name was Stockton Rush, and he was, by every account, brilliant, charming, and absolutely certain. He had founded a company called OceanGate, and he wanted to do something no one had done at scale. Take paying passengers down to the Titanic. Not scientists with government grants, customers, people who could write a check. The check was about $250,000. For that, you were not a tourist. You were, in the language of the company, a mission specialist. You were an explorer, and that word did a lot of quiet work. Rush spoke the language of our era fluently, the language of the disruptor, the idea that progress belongs to the people willing to break the rules the timid hide behind. That regulation is where innovation goes to die. In Silicon Valley, that philosophy built trillion-dollar companies. It is, in many rooms, treated as wisdom. He once said he believed he'd be remembered for the rules he broke. He was applying the gospel of the software startup, move fast, break things, ask forgiveness, to a steel and carbon fiber tube that would carry human beings to a place where the ocean presses down with the weight of the Eiffel Tower on every square meter. Here is the part that matters, the part that makes this a tragedy instead of a stunt. The dream was real. The engineering was genuinely novel. Most deep submersibles are heavy spheres of metal, room for 2 or 3, almost nothing else. Rush's team built something different, a long capsule wound from carbon fiber, light enough to carry 5, cheap enough to run again and again. If it worked, it would crack the deep ocean open for everyone. If it worked. Carbon fiber is a miracle material. Strong, light, the stuff of race cars and fighter jets. It is superb at being pulled. The deep ocean does not pull. The deep ocean squeezes, and no one had ever certified a carbon fiber hull to carry passengers as deep as this one intended to go. It was, in the truest sense of the word, experimental. It helps to understand who Stockton Rush was, because the easy story, reckless rich man, vanity project, is not quite true, and the untrue part is the dangerous part. He came from money, yes, but he was also a serious person, a pilot in his teens, an aerospace engineer by training, a man who had spent years thinking hard about how to reach the deep ocean for less, and who genuinely believed that the established way, the slow, certified, expensive way, was holding human exploration back. And in a sense, he was right, which is exactly what made him so persuasive. The deep ocean really is absurdly hard to reach. The handful of craft that can go down to Titanic depth are national assets, booked years out, run by governments and billion-dollar institutions. Rush looked at that and saw what every disruptor sees, a gate and a crowd of experts standing in front of it, and a fortune waiting for the person bold enough to walk around them. That instinct has been right so many times. It is the instinct that put a computer in your pocket and a stranger's car outside your door. We have built an entire culture around rewarding it, around the founder who ignores the doubters and is proven a genius. We tell that story constantly because we love it and because it is often true. But there is an asymmetry hiding inside that story, and the ocean is where it surfaces. When a software founder ignores the cautious and is wrong, an app crashes, money is lost, everyone moves on. When a founder ignores the cautious about the physics of the deep sea and is wrong, the failure is not a crash, it is a funeral. The same boldness we applaud in one room is, in another, simply the decision to gamble with other people's lives. The trait does not change, only the stakes do, and the deep ocean does not grade on a curve. So picture the offer, the way it was felt by the people who said yes, a brilliant founder, a beautiful machine, a century-old graveyard that almost no living person has seen with their own eyes, and a promise, delivered with total confidence, that the experts were just being cautious. That caution, past a certain point, is the enemy of wonder. It is easy now, knowing the end, to ask how anyone could be so foolish. Hold that question, because the people who climbed in were not fools. One of them knew the deep ocean better than almost anyone alive. One of them was a seasoned explorer who had stood at both poles. They were careful, accomplished, intelligent adults. That is precisely what should frighten you. Because the seduction was not stupidity. The seduction was belief, and belief is the most reliable engine human beings have ever built. It has crossed oceans and split atoms and put footprints on the moon. It has also, again and again, sealed the door from the outside. Before any of these 5 ever saw the water, before the checks were signed, there was a man inside the company whose job was to look at the machine and tell the truth about it. In 2018, he did, and what happened to him is where the warnings begin. In 2018, OceanGate had a director of marine operations named David Lockridge. His job was not to dream. His job was to look at the machine and decide whether it was safe to put people inside it. He was the brake on the car. Every serious project has one. That year, he wrote a report, a quality inspection of the submersible, and the report did not say what the founder wanted to hear. Lockridge raised concerns about the hull and about the way the craft was being tested. He pushed for a kind of testing that can find the flaws you cannot see. The small flaws, deep in the material, that grow a little with every dive. He warned that the vessel was being taken far deeper than it had been proven to survive. For raising those concerns, David Lockridge was fired. He took his worries to a federal workplace safety agency. The company sued him. The man whose job was to tell the truth about the machine was, in the end, treated as the problem. Sit with the shape of that, not a stranger, not a competitor. The company's own safety lead, looking at the company's own submarine, said, "Not like this," and the answer was to remove him. It is worth being concrete about what he was afraid of, because it is the whole physical heart of this story. Carbon fiber, under the squeeze of the deep, can begin to come apart from the inside. The layers separating, microscopically, invisibly, a little more each time it is taken down and brought back up. From the outside, the hull looks perfect. Inside the material, the damage accumulates. And the kind of testing that can see that hidden damage before it matters was the testing Lockridge wanted and did not get. OceanGate had an answer to that fear, and the answer is the most haunting detail in the entire design. They fitted the hull with a real-time monitoring system, sensors meant to listen to the carbon fiber and detect the sounds of it starting to fail, so the craft could be brought safely to the surface in time. They presented it as a safety feature, a breakthrough even. Sit with what that actually means. Their safeguard was a system to hear the hull breaking, but the failure of a deep-sea hull does not arrive with a polite warning and time to climb back to daylight. At those depths, when carbon fiber finally gives, it gives all at once, faster than the speed of sound in water. A microphone listening for the crack would learn of the disaster at the exact instant of the disaster, and not one moment before. They had built, in effect, a smoke detector for an explosion, and they sailed on it. There was a name for what they were doing, and the industry letter used it: experimental. Every other craft that carries passengers to these depths submits to an outside body that inspects the design, the materials, the build, and signs off, or does not. It is slow, it is expensive, it exists because the people who do this for a living learned over a century of drowned pioneers that no single brilliant person should be the only judge of their own machine. OceanGate chose not to do it, and here is the thing that still stuns people. That choice was not illegal, and it was not only him. That same spring, in 2018, an organization of the people who do this for a living, submersible engineers, scientists, explorers, more than 36 of them, sent OceanGate a letter. It was polite, it was technical, and underneath the courtesy, it was as direct as professionals ever get with one another. They wrote that the company's current experimental approach could lead to outcomes ranging, and these are their words, from minor to catastrophic. They were troubled that OceanGate was not putting the Titan through the deep sea industry's recognized independent certification, the outside check that every other passenger submersible accepts. They worried in plain terms that telling the public the craft would meet safety standards while skipping the process that proves it was misleading. Catastrophic, in a letter 5 years before, with more than 30 names behind it. So how does a brilliant man hear the word catastrophic from 36 experts and keep going? This is the question at the center of the whole story, and the answer is uncomfortable because it is not stupidity. When you have built your entire identity around being the one who breaks the rules the timid hide behind, a warning does not sound like a warning. It sounds like applause. It sounds like proof that you are doing something bold enough to scare the cautious. Every objection becomes evidence that you are right. The expert who says stop is just the gatekeeper that history will forget. The founder hears the alarm, and what it confirms is that he is exactly the maverick he believes himself to be. That is the trap, not ignorance, conviction. A warning can only save you if some part of you is willing to be wrong. There is a detail from inside the Titan that became famous, and it is worth slowing down for because of the way it makes you feel. The craft was steered with a modified video game controller, an off-the-shelf gamepad, the kind sold for a console. When people first heard that, they laughed. It sounds like a joke. And then the laugh catches in the throat, because the controller was never really the point. The controller was a symptom. It was the visible piece of an invisible philosophy. that the old, expensive, careful way of doing things was waste, that a clever shortcut was as good as the proven path. Most of the time, in most of life, the shortcut works, and you look like a genius for taking it. The deep ocean is not most of life. And the passengers were told, not in fine print they might have missed, told. Before the dive, each of them signed a waiver. The document stated plainly that the vessel was experimental, that it had not been approved or certified by any regulator. And it named in writing the thing that could happen to them. It used the word death. They read it, they signed it. And here we have to be careful and fair, because it would be easy and cruel to call that recklessness. It was not, it was trust. They had looked into the eyes of a confident, accomplished man who had done this dive before and come back, and they decided to believe him over a piece of paper. People do that every single day. We board aircraft we do not understand, take medicine we cannot pronounce, trust engineers we will never meet. Civilization runs on exactly this, on trusting the person who says, I have checked, it is safe. The whole tragedy of the Titan is what happens when that trust is placed in someone who had stopped checking. You might ask where the authorities were. The answer is its own quiet indictment. The dive happened in international waters, far out in the North Atlantic, launched from a ship, in the seam between everyone's rules and no one's. An American company operating beyond American shores, carrying citizens of several countries to a place no national regulator clearly governed. The Titan was not breaking the law because it had been built, deliberately or not, to operate where the law did not quite reach. The certification it skipped was voluntary. The waiver did the rest. On paper, everyone had consented. On paper, everything was fine. So there was no inspector who could storm in and ground it. No agency with a clear duty to say stop. The only people positioned to halt this were the experts who wrote letters, the employee who was fired, and the passengers themselves, who had been handed the warning and asked, in effect, to trust the man instead. The system that was supposed to catch a thing like this had a hole in it exactly the shape of Stockton Rush's ambition, and he sailed through it in full view for years. So who trusted him? 5 people went down on June the 18th, 2023. One of them was Paul-Henri Nargeolet. To the people who knew the Titanic, he was simply Mr. Titanic. He had spent his life going down to that wreck, more times than almost anyone alive. If there was a single human being on Earth qualified to look at this dive and judge the risk, it was him, and he went. Remember that, when it is tempting to feel superior to the dead, the world's leading expert on this exact place got into this exact machine. The seduction does not spare the wise. It may seek them out. One of them was Hamish Harding, a British businessman and adventurer who had been to the poles and to the edge of space, a collector of the planet's hardest places to reach. For a man like that, the floor of the North Atlantic was one of the last boxes left to check. And 2 of them were a father and a son, Shahzada Dawood, a businessman from a prominent family, and his boy, Suleiman, 19 years old. This is the part of the story that should never be told quickly. Suleiman was, by his family's account, frightened of the dive. He went anyway over a Father's Day weekend to be close to his father. He brought something with him into that capsule, a Rubik's Cube. He could solve one in seconds, and he was hoping to set a record, to solve it at the bottom of the ocean, beside the most famous shipwreck in the world. A 19-year-old's bright, ordinary dream carried 2.5 miles down. And there is one more detail, and it is almost too much to hold. The seat Suleiman took on that dive was originally his mother's. Christine Dawood had planned to go. She stepped aside so her son could have the place he wanted. So she would not be in the capsule. She would be on the ship at the surface, waiting, which means that of all the people in this story, she is the one who would see everything and be able to do nothing. 5 people, an expert who knew better, an adventurer who had survived everything, a father and a frightened son who came for love, and a captain so certain of his own machine that he would pilot it himself. They had all been warned. The warning had been written down years before in a word, catastrophic. And on a gray morning in June, they walked across a platform on the open sea, and they climbed in, and the hatch was closed behind them, bolt by bolt, from the outside. At the surface, the morning is ordinary. A support ship, a floating platform, a small craft lowered into cold gray water, people with clipboards and coffee. The most dangerous moments in human history almost never look dangerous. They look like a Tuesday. And this was not the first time. That is the foundation the confidence was built on. The Titan had made this dive before. It had reached the Titanic more than once and carried its passengers back up into the daylight. Every safe return was logged and remembered and offered as proof. To the people climbing in, the math felt simple and kind. It worked last time. It worked the time before that. The warnings were years old now. And here was the machine, still surfacing, still bringing people home. But a hull that is quietly coming apart does not warn you which dive will be its last. Every successful descent was not evidence of safety. It was the hidden damage, accumulating, one cycle closer to a threshold no one had truly calculated. Survival was being read as proof. They were not building a track record. They were spending one. On the morning of the 18th of June, 2023, off the coast of Newfoundland, 5 people climbed into the Titan and began the descent toward the wreck of the Titanic. A captain who trusted his own machine, the expert who knew that wreck better than almost anyone alive, an adventurer collecting one more impossible place, a father and his 19-year-old son with a Rubik's Cube in his bag. The Titan slips beneath the surface and begins to fall. Not dive, fall, slowly, on purpose. For the first few minutes, there is still light, blue-green, shimmering, the sun reaching down as far as it can. Inside, 5 people in a space with no seats, sitting on the floor shoulder to shoulder. Through the one small window, the bright world thins. Then the light starts to leave. Down through the layer, the scientists call the twilight zone, where the last of the sun gives out and the blue goes. To gray goes to nothing. The water gets colder. The pressure builds. Gently at first, then with a weight that is hard to imagine. For every foot they descend, the ocean leans in a little harder. They are not afraid. Everything is working. They are talking to the ship above by text message. Short notes typed in the cold and the dark. The mood from the messages is calm, excited even. They are almost there, almost to the most famous wreck on Earth. One of the last things they send up is 3 words. All good here. All good here. A few thousand meters down, a teenager with a Rubik's Cube in his hands. A father beside him, an expert, an adventurer, a captain. All good here. A little later, a final message, that the craft had released some of its weights, the normal step as it neared the bottom. And then, about an hour and a half into the descent, the contact stops. No alarm, no distress call. The signal from the Titan simply ends. Now I have to tell you something, and I have to tell it carefully because of who is still listening above. The people on the ship at the surface do not know what has happened. They will hope and search and pray for 4 days. But the investigators who would spend the next 2 years reconstructing this dive reached a conclusion. The end did not come slowly. It came in an instant. Faster than thought, faster than fear, faster than the human body can register anything at all. And it came not after 4 days of dwindling air, but here, on the way down, on the first day. I am not going to describe it. There is nothing to see and nothing that should be seen, and the people inside felt nothing. That is the one mercy in this entire story, and it is the only one, and it matters. There was no suffering. One moment, there were 5 people talking in the dark, and then the ocean, which had been asked for years to make an exception, simply declined. At the surface, the sun is still up. The ship is still waiting for the next message, and the world does not know yet that there is no one left to send it. When the Titan does not surface on schedule, the people on the support ship do the thing human beings do. They tell themselves it is fine, a communication fault, a delay, any explanation but the one that is true. And then, as the hours pass and the radio stays silent, the fear becomes too large to talk away, and they make the call that sets the whole world in motion. What follows is one of the strangest things many of us have ever watched. For 4 days in June of 2023, the entire planet stopped and stared at a patch of empty ocean. Coast guards, navies, aircraft, robots, the deepest diving machines that exist, all rushing toward one point in the North Atlantic. and billions of people, on phones, on televisions, refreshing the same headline, holding their breath together. And the whole world was counting, because officials had said the submersible carried only so much breathable air, that the people inside had perhaps 4 days. So every broadcast ran the same cruel arithmetic. 96 hours, 70, 40. The oxygen clock, a countdown printed on the bottom of every screen, ticking down toward a deadline. We were not really watching a rescue. We were watching a clock, and we could not look away because the clock made it feel like there was still time, like the story had not been decided, like if enough ships hurried, if enough good people tried hard enough, the ending could still be changed. And then came the detail that broke everyone's heart and lifted it and broke it again. Searchers reported sounds in the water, banging, regular, rhythmic, every so often. The kind of sound a trapped person makes when they strike a hull to say, "I am here, I am alive. Come find me." The world seized on it. Of course it did. It was hope you could hear. Newsrooms led with it. Strangers prayed over it. Somewhere down there, in the cold and the dark, someone was still knocking. On the support ship at the surface, a mother was waiting. Christine Dawood, who had given her seat to her son, stood on the deck of that vessel through the whole of it. Her husband and her boy were somewhere beneath her, and the world was telling her there was still time, and she waited and she hoped, because that is the only thing a person can do when the people they love are on the wrong side of the water. And this is the cruelest fact in the entire story. The thing we now know, that she could not. There was no one knocking. The banging, whatever its source, was not them. The 4 days the world spent hoping, the countdown we all watched, the prayers, the headlines, the held breath of billions of people, all of it was for 5 people who, the investigators concluded, were already gone before the search had truly begun. We were not racing the clock. There was no clock. The oxygen never mattered. The whole world held its breath for people who could no longer hold theirs and had not since the first afternoon. We should be honest about what those 4 days were, for the rest of us, because we were not only witnesses, we were an audience. The countdown made it a story, and a story needs to be watched. And so the whole strange machinery of attention switched on. The submarine became a topic, then a trend, then for a great many people a joke. Diagrams, dark humor, the rich man's folly turned into something to scroll past between other things. It is uncomfortable to remember now, knowing that while the jokes were being made, the 5 were already gone, and a mother was standing on a ship watching the sea. But that discomfort is worth keeping, because it is true about us. We can grieve and gawk at the same time. We can turn a real family's last hours into entertainment and genuinely pray for them in the same breath on the same screen. And the other half of that machinery was not a circus at all. It was one of the largest, deepest, fastest rescue efforts ever attempted. Ships and aircraft and remote vehicles converging from several nations, people working without sleep, spending real fortunes and real effort on the chance, however small, of pulling 5 strangers out of the most hostile place on the planet. That was real too. The compassion was not fake. It simply arrived, like all of it, too late to matter. There is a kind of grief that can only be felt looking backward. The grief of realizing that your hope arrived too late to do anything but hurt. For 4 days, the world loved these strangers and willed them home. The tragedy is not that the love was wasted. The tragedy is that it was always, from the first hour, a memorial that did not yet know it was won. On the 4th day, a robot reaching the seafloor found what everyone had refused to imagine. Not the Titan. Pieces of it. A field of debris resting in the silt, and resting, of all the places in the vast Atlantic, about 500 meters from the bow of the Titanic, the 2 of them side by side in the dark. The search was over. It had never, the experts now understood, been a rescue at all. In the days after, the question the world asked was the simplest and the oldest. How could this happen? And the answer, as it came out, was almost harder to bear than the silence had been. Because the answer was, everyone knew, or everyone who needed to. The safety director had known, and written it down, and been fired for it. 3 dozen of the world's experts had known, and sent a letter with the word catastrophic in it, 5 years early. The recognized certification, The independent check that exists precisely to catch this had been offered and refused. And there was one more witness, the one that cannot be fired or argued with, the machine itself. Investigators found that the Titan had been telling its makers it was failing. On an earlier expedition, the hull had shown anomalies, sounds and signs that the carbon fiber was beginning to come apart, layer from layer, the kind of damage that does not heal and only grows. And those warnings, too, were not properly addressed before the craft carried passengers again. The hull had been knocking long before the search ever heard a sound, and no one let it stop the dive. In the months that followed, much of this came into the open in a way disasters rarely do. There were public hearings, days of testimony, former employees, engineers, officials, the documents laid out one after another for anyone to see. The warning letter with the word catastrophic in it, the records of the firing, the last messages from the descent, read aloud into a quiet room. All good here. It was no longer rumor or reconstruction. It was the paper trail of a thing that everyone, it turned out, had been able to see coming. And that is the strange, hard gift of an investigation like this. It refuses to let us call it a mystery. There is no twist to wait for, no missing piece, no moment where the truth turns out to be more forgiving than it looked. The fuller the record gets, the worse it reads. Not because anyone hid the danger, but because so many people named it out loud in writing and were waved away. The hearings did not solve the puzzle of how this happened. They proved there had never been a puzzle. 2 years later, in 2025, the United States Coast Guard finished its investigation. More than 300 pages. And when you strip away the diagrams and the testimony, the board reduced the whole catastrophe to a single word. Preventable. Not unlucky. Not a freak of the deep. Not the price of being a pioneer. Preventable. The board found that the cause was not the cruelty of the ocean, but the choices of the company. A failure to design, to certify, to maintain, and to inspect inside a culture that had stopped wanting to hear the word no. The sea did not take these 5 people. That is the truth the report tells. The sea did what the sea has always done. What it did to the Titanic 100 years before, what it will do to anything that is wrong about it. It pressed. The choice to be there against every warning. That was made up here in the light by people who could still hear the word catastrophic and decided it was meant for someone else. The report did not stop at that one word. Across its hundreds of pages, the board described a company where raising a safety concern was unwelcome. It used the language of a toxic culture, and it laid out failure after failure of design, of testing, of maintenance, of honesty about what the craft was. It issued more than a dozen recommendations so that the next company is not allowed to find the same hole in the rules. It read, in the end, less like the story of an accident than the autopsy of a decision. And then there is the question that has no satisfying answer. Who pays for it? In an ordinary disaster, there is a trial. Someone stands before a court and answers for the choices, but the person most responsible for the Titan was inside the Titan. Stockton Rush died in the machine he built, beside the people his certainty had carried down. There would be no prosecution of him because the ocean had already closed the case. The company stopped operating. The lawsuits remain. So the only sentence ever truly passed in this story was the one the sea carried out, instantly in the dark, on the first afternoon. And the sea, unlike a court, does not separate the guilty from the innocent. It took the captain who would not listen and the boy who was only there for his father in the very same instant, and made no distinction between them at all. That is the cruelty at the bottom of this. Belief kills the believer and the bystander on identical terms. And somewhere in that field of debris, 2.5 miles down, there is a Rubik's Cube. It belonged to a 19-year-old who was afraid and who went anyway because he loved his father. He never got to solve it at the bottom of the ocean. He should never have been asked to try. He is the reason this story is not a lesson about hubris or engineering or the arrogance of powerful men. Although it is all of those things, he is the reason it is simply a tragedy. Because the people who pay for our certainty are so often the ones who never shared it. The mother who gave up her seat is still here. She lost her husband and her son in the same instant, in the same place, and she carries what no report can resolve. The people who love these 5 do not get an ending. They get a horizon and a sea that does not answer, and the rest of their lives. And down in the dark, the 2 of them keep each other company now. A great ship that was called unsinkable, and a small craft built by a man who thought safety was waste. 111 years apart, at almost the same spot on the floor of the ocean. The same lesson, taught twice in the same cold water. We will build the next beautiful machine. We always do. And someone brilliant and certain will tell us the cautious are just afraid, and that the rules are for people without vision. He may even be right most of the time. That is what makes him so easy to believe. But the ocean is still down there, patient, exact, doing quietly the only due diligence that has never once been wrong. And it is still waiting for the next person who decides the warning was meant for someone else. All good here.